in my mind, the critical component to a good negotiator is listening. Understand what is going to move the needle for the person on the other side of the table. A lot of times it is money, but it isn't always money, or it's the structure of the deal. There are different components. You have different levers in the negotiation. Understand what moves the needle for them.
All right, Dove, thanks for joining me today on the show.
My pleasure, Chris. I look forward to our conversation.
So let's start. I believe you were at a conference, or maybe it had been a series of meetings with Gary Barnett, and he asked you to come work at Extell. How did that whole relationship start, and what did it look like when you got to Extell early in your career?
So I actually knew Gary not well. We had been at the same college for a brief period of time. So I knew him from there. At the time that fast forward now, however many years later, how many years later? 20 probably or more years later. I was working as an investment sales broker in New York City. I had a deal that I presented to Gary. I knew him, so I called him up on the phone. I said, Gary, I got this deal. The deal happened to have been in Toronto. I really liked the deal as an investment and would have loved to have done it on my own. And I said, listen, Gary, I got this deal in Toronto. This is it. I laid it out to him, but I don't want a fee. I want a piece of the action. I want a piece of the deal. So he said, all right, let's go take a look. So we went out, took a look at the deal. He liked it. We ended up buying. No, I take that back. We did not buy the deal. Okay, but it began a conversation, and that conversation led to Gary make me an offer, saying, "Look, I like the way you think. I have no one on the acquisition side." Gary, at that point, I think in New York City, he had, I don't know, 3 people working for him. That was it. He had bought a portfolio of suburban office buildings, and he had a management office based in Louisville, Kentucky. But he had done one development deal in New York City, and that was it. At the time, this was in 2003. He had done one development deal, and he owned the Belnord, which was it's a square block on the Upper West Side, a rental, and that was it. That's what he had, and we were actually working out of an apartment in the apartment building that he bought. Just to give you an idea, I remember my office was in what used to be the kitchen, and that's how we started. And I said, well, what's my job? Tell me my job. He says, your job is to find me deals. I said, okay, what are you looking for? He says, anything that we can make money. You convince me it can make money, I'll buy it.
Set the stage. I'm going to spoiler alert. When we met, and your reputation is to be, I'm going to go ahead and say that the greatest land assembler that New York has ever witnessed. And now I want to go back to the Extell. Give me just a description. If you had to describe like the New York market and assembling land, what is it like? Like, what did you know? Did you even know how to assemble land when you got there? Or is this a learned skill that you learned working for Gary?
I knew nothing, to be perfectly honest. I was a real estate broker. When I started with Gary, I was working on investment sales. Nothing to do with land assemblage. Absolutely nothing. When I started there and realized that, although Gary never articulated it, that he really wanted to focus on the development business, I started climbing in and understanding how the zoning in New York City works, which is the critical piece to be able to assemble land. You've got to know where you can get the maximum FAR, what districts give you the maximum FAR, what zone for residential, what zone for commercial, etc. So it was really a learning experience to understand how New York City development works, and then identify blocks that were underdeveloped, which is pretty simple. You just drive up and down the streets, and if you're in a 10 FAR zone and you see a 4-story walk-up, a block full of 4-story walk-ups, you know that it's underdeveloped. And then it's a question of, this is all pre-internet, just to be clear, right? I started with Gary in 2003. Everything was being done on paper. There was a big book with plot plans, and you interviewed Bob Knackel. He showed you his map room?
Yeah.
Right. So his map room has all of those plot plans, right? It shows every plot in Manhattan. And you had to go look at the plot. Was it an irregular shaped plot? Was it a regular shaped plot? Could you see which lots would you have to buy in order to have the best and most effective development site? Because the typical block in Manhattan is 200 feet wide. You only really need, for a residential building, to build on 100 by 100. So, which allows you to buy, your typical building is either a 20 or a 25 footer, right? So you'd buy four 25 footers. That's your development site. And then you'd buy the air rights from the other 4 25 footers. Because in order to transfer air rights, it has to be contiguous to the development site. So I can't buy air rights for block A that's across the street.
So wait, if you bought 4, so you have 100 feet, you bought 4 25s.
They were 25 by 100s. That was the lots.
Okay, so if you buy 4 of them, then you got 100 by 100. Why would you buy 4 more? Why would you buy the air rights next door so that you could build twice as tall of a building?
That is correct. That is correct. So just for you to understand, again, this is pre-internet, right? So if the people on the block found out that I was trying to assemble a development site for residential, somebody would realize that this guy isn't buying my building for my building. He's buying my building to knock it down and build a high-rise building, and therefore I can ask for more than the market would bear, right? Or the market would be willing to pay. So I had business cards. I had a Dove Hertz business card. I had a, John Smith business card. I had a Peter Schwartz business card. And I would go to the different people on the block as different people.
How many identities did you take on over 14 years? Everybody around town's like, "What's up, Jack?" Next guy, "What's up, Zach?"
And I said, I'm just a little guy looking to buy 4-story walk-ups. That's it. That's all I was interested in.
What is the zoning set in New York, or has any zoning been changed in the last 10 years? I guess there's variances, but how long has the current zoning been in place, and can you go change it, or it is what it is?
You can apply for a zoning change. It's extremely difficult in today's political environment. Forget it, you're not getting it at all. But even back then, you could apply, but we didn't do anything where you needed a zoning change. The easiest and simplest way to the finish line was to stay within the box. And the box allows whatever the zoning was, and we just stayed in the box.
And you bought $20 million worth of deals over 14 years working at Extell, box by box.
Put a B at the end of that.
Yeah.
And
20
yes,
billion.
That's correct. So just for it's a national audience. New York is an anomaly in that it is, I think, the only city in the United States that has as of right zoning. So you don't have to go before a zoning board. You don't have to get entitlements. It's all laid out in a code. There's this big fat book that's a zoning, it has the zoning code, and that book tells you exactly every plot, what you can do on that plot of land.
Were air rights baked into it from the beginning? Like, I'd imagine when the zoning was first laid out, there wasn't huge towers going up everywhere. Like, people probably hadn't imagined that air rights would be so important, or was it was baked in from the beginning?
I think it was baked in from the beginning. I think the zoning was formalized. I'm doing by memory. I think it was in the 70s. I think until then, I don't think it was, in the formal standardized context that it is today. I think that happened in the 70s. But once it happened, yes, air rights were baked in.
So your job essentially became go put together the greatest sites that you can in New York, piece by piece.
Yeah, find well located, underdeveloped blocks and assemble the buildings and the air rights. Now, you're not done after you assemble buildings and air rights. You have tenants, buildings you want to knock down. New York City is blessed with rent regulated tenants. We have both rent stabilized and rent controlled tenants. And those tenants have rights. Their leases cannot be terminated. And you have to buy them out in order to vacate the tenants. So you're looking at your average assemblage where you're building on 100 by 100 lot. With the air rights, you're probably building, I don't know, 200,000 square feet, right? Buildings, if not more. And you could be talking about 100 transactions in order to get to a developable property, between buying the buildings, buying out the tenants, buying the air rights, doing the whole thing, getting it vacant.
The tenant risk, do you just bake that in up front and you're like, look, let's just get it bought and we'll figure out tenant risks next? Or is it all part of the same equation from the day you start looking at the site? Or is it just step by step? You'll get there if you spend enough time on it.
Listen, I can't tell you that every single time I was 100% successful in buying out every tenant. But so there is risk. And today that risk is even greater because of regulations that the city has put into place to make it more difficult to buy out the tenants. When I started, it was a lot easier. And there are tenants who've made fortunes, millions of dollars in buyouts because they were the holdouts. They were the last tenant to be bought out, and they were holding up a multi-million-dollar development. And they were represented by a very sharp attorney or attorneys, and they made millions of dollars for a studio rent stabilized apartment. I had one guy, just to give you a story to illustrate this. I had one guy. We were assembling a site on Lexington and 86th Street, and the last tenant, the last holdout. And this guy lived in a studio apartment. The first time I walked in there, I couldn't hardly open the door. He was a hoarder. I assume you're familiar with what a hoarder is. It literally, there was an aisle on either side, newspapers piled from floor to ceiling, and that's how you got to the back of the apartment, down this aisle, right? And it took me months to gain the guy's trust that he would even entertain a negotiation. And we ended up buying a 4-story walk-up next door that had a vacant studio apartment, moving him and all of his stuff into that studio apartment, paid him a couple of $1 million. He died 6 months later. 6 months after we moved him, he died, and with no will and no heirs. The money went to the New York State.
So what you're telling me is, if there's any kids listening to this, you can either go have a brilliant career and go get an education, or you can just go find the right building to live in, be a holdout, and get and secure the bag. There's two career paths in this world, and one of them is being a holdout in New York City. All right, we went through 8 stories that we were going to tell people today about what it's like, some of these legendary stories of assembling some of the most iconic sites that have created some of the most iconic buildings in New York. And I freaking loved it. So I can't wait to hear them again. But we're going to start. The tallest building, I believe, in all of New York City is Central Park Tower. And you put together the site to do that. And it's an incredible story. So let's start on that story. What was it like to assemble Central Park Tower site?
So most of it is your standard assemblage work. When I started at Extell, Gary had already owned a piece of it, and the objective was to grow it. But there is one fascinating story that that happened on that site. So the site is on 50. It went from 57th Street to 58th Street, and the 58th Street side, you had head-on views of Central Park, which is, that's where the money is. Those are the money views. The problem was that a competitor of ours bought a building on 58th Street that was a low-rise apartment building and had the same plan we did, which was knock the building down and build a high-rise. Now, had they built the high-rise as originally planned, we would, our views would have been blocked. But there was a solution. The lots, each of our lots were large enough that if we pulled a little to the left and he pulled a little to the right, everybody would be happy and we could all have views. When we first approached that developer, he was unwilling to play. He said, "No, I got my site and I'm going to do what I want, and too bad on you." Well, it turns out that he had a tenant in his building that was a parking garage with a lease that had some term on it. And I approached the parking garage tenant and I said to him, "Listen, I am going to offer you Christmas in July." He says, "What are you talking about?" I said, "It's very simple. You have a lease, correct?" "Yes." "It goes for whatever, 5-10 years, right?" "Yes." Said, "You're running your business here. You do well here. Great location for a parking garage." Said, "I'm doing great." I said, "I'll tell you what. I'm going to pay you X amount of dollars, and you don't have to do anything. You keep running your business. You're keeping making the money. You have to do one thing and one thing only." He says, "What do I have to do?" I said, "When you are approached by anyone to negotiate a lease termination, you have to tell them no. That's all you have to do. And you have to call me. And you can never talk to anyone about a lease termination. I am the only one who can talk on your behalf. That's it. And for that, here's a check." He says, "That's all I have to do?" I said, "That's all you have to do." Guy says, "Deal." So we wait a little bit of time. Of course, we knew that the developer needed him out in order to knock the building down and build his building. Developer approaches him. He says, "Listen, I'd like to sit down and talk to you about your lease." He says, "No." He says, "Well, what? You didn't even hear what I had to say." "No." He says, "But at least wait to listen to my offer." "No." Calls me up and he tells me so-and-so approached him. What does he do? I said, "You just keep saying no for a while. I'll let you know when we change the tune." So this went on a couple of times. Finally, the guy said, listen, what do I have to do to get your attention? He says, you don't have to do anything. You have to call this guy because I'm not talking to you. And once they realized that it was us, first they realized we had him, but they first went to court and tried to terminate his lease because for whatever reason they claimed that that he was in default under his lease. He wasn't using it per the use clause, which wasn't the truth. So we fought that fight. Ultimately, they realized that they weren't getting him out without us, and we ended up negotiating placement of the buildings so that it was mutually beneficial to everybody. Plus a very nice payday.
How long did it take them to negotiate him out of that lease? Was that over a year? Was that months? Was that years? Like, how long were they fighting with the parking lot guy?
It was at least a year. They took him to court. They took him to court to try to terminate his lease.
And then they called you, and what'd you say? You said, hey, it's Dove. What's up, guys?
Okay. Now it's time to play.
Were they ready to play, or did they still want to fight at that point? I would have been pretty upset to call you if that was what it was leading to. I'm imagining the first call wasn't like all roses and butterflies.
Listen, I got to tell you something. I think ultimately New York City developers are extremely pragmatic, and ultimately there's a goal, and that goal is to develop the building, and time is money. And, they fight until they realize that there's no fighting anymore. I got to make a deal. And the president of, it was Vornado actually, President of Vornado sat down with Gary and said, let's go. We got to cut a deal here.
So for context, how many pieces of land did you have to put together over how many years?
That deal, I would say, took about 10 years.
How big was that site?
Over 1 million square feet.
I know, but was it 100 by 100 or was it a 200 by 2?
Oh, no. I don't remember the exact size. It was huge in New York standards.
Okay. And over 10 years, did you have holdouts along the way there? Like, I'm assuming that somebody caught on along the way that, okay, we're just going to hold out.
Yes. You had property owners who were holding out. You had tenants who were holding out, and you just got to keep at it. This is a long game. You're playing a long game here.
And the capital that gets behind this, I'm assuming maybe it's institutional, but do you kind of go to a capital source and you're like, look, we're just going to keep buying property and we're just going to keep holding it. We'll rent it. It's a covered land play. Like, what kind of money wants to get into a 10-year land assemblage? That seems like
that's very interesting that you asked that question. In most instances, it is not institutional equity. They don't have the stomach for this.
Yeah, it's private.
In most instances, it's private. It's high net worth individuals who are willing to take the risk. It's friends and family money. It's the developer himself putting up a significant portion of the equity. The payoff is huge because the difference between owning one building versus owning a development site is phenomenal. There's a tremendous markup to market once you have completed the development, the assemblage, and you have a development site wrapped in a bow. I mean, there are developers in New York who don't even really ever develop. All they do is assemble sites, wrap them in a bow with plans approved, and then sell it off to someone who's actually going to build it. And when it comes to the actual development, their institutional equity will step in.
And again, it's a map. You go to the map room at Knuckles map room, you can see the whole city. I'm assuming there are no more secrets. Like, everybody knows where all the potential sites are. Do people still fight to bust up people's assemblages, or is there kind of a gentleman's agreement that once I start assembling this site, you'll stay out of my hair?
The guys playing in the upper echelon of the New York City development game usually don't step on each other's toes because, they're all in the business for the long run. And karma is the end of that sentence. I'm not going to say it. And whatever you do comes back around at you. So you're going to do that to me. I'm going to do that to you. There's no reason to do that. But you have the lower tier players who will follow developers. Somebody will follow a Gary Barnett and say, I think Gary's trying to assemble here. I'm going to go see if I can buy one of the other sites, one of the other properties in the assemblage, so that I can use that as a holdout and hold them up and get paid a lot of money for it. I'll tell you this, there is an attorney, he's older now, and I'm not sure if he's still practicing, but there was an attorney who would underdeveloped blocks in rent regulated buildings, and he'd knock at the door and he'd find one tenant, just one, in one potential development site, one tenant, and he'd say, this is the deal. At some point, you're going to sign an agreement with me. He signed them up now. And it lasted for years. This agreement lasted for years. And he said, at some point, someone's going to come knocking at your door and want to buy you out. You can't talk to him. He has to talk to me. And I promise you, he says, I take a third of what he gives you. I will get you the most money of anyone in this entire assemblage site. And this guy became a very wealthy man doing exactly that.
I repeat, kids, you can go to Harvard and get an MBA, or you can go find that magic tenant and you will have that beach house that you've always wanted. All right, One Manhattan Square assemblage, the Pathmark fee and lease. What happened there?
That's an interesting story. So you had a property on the edge of downtown Manhattan. It was occupied by a Pathmark supermarket, one-story building with a parking lot. Okay. It was rezoned by the city under a master plan, and you could now build a very tall building on that site. And it was a big site. The site had a fee owner and a leasehold. Pathmark had a long-term lease, 49 years, something like that. And there was a fee owner. Now, the fee owner was not able to monetize the rezoning because he had Pathmark sitting there, right? So I identified this, and we realized that the path here was to buy the lease. Because if we control the lease, then we would ultimately control the site, as opposed to going the other way. If we owned the fee, we were subject to Pathmark's lease. But if we were able to buy Pathmark's lease, then we could ultimately buy the fee position and develop the site. We go to Pathmark and we negotiate a deal with Pathmark. We go to contract with Pathmark, and then the market tanks. And Pathmark had already put it in their annual report that they were going to receive so much and so much money on the buyout of their lease. So the market tanks in 2008, and it made no sense at that point for us to close on the purchase of the lease. So we kept trying to extend the lease. At one point, they said, okay, we had enough. And they terminated the contract, which was their right. The CEO left. He left. He wasn't very happy with us, as you can imagine. It made him look a little foolish because he had made an announcement that, they were getting this windfall. A new CEO came in. The market picked up. We're now in 2009. The market picked up a little. We went back, renegotiated a purchase price for less than we had originally negotiated with, and bought the Pathmark. We bought the Pathmark lease. Now we had to buy the fee. The fee was owned by two partners who didn't get along. One wanted to sell and one didn't. We ended up buying the position of one of the partners, and basically negotiating a deal with the other partner, with the second partner who didn't want to sell, because we were now in the partnership. And we could make life miserable for each other, or you could get enough money to make you very happy and call it a day. And that was the Pathmark lease.
Okay, so real quick, Pathmark's got 49 years. I don't know what they're paying a month. I'm just making up a number, 100.
Not a lot.
100,000 a month, whatever it is. And you're like, hey, we're going to pay you a couple $1,000,000 and we're going to start making the rent payments on your behalf, but we control the lease. And if at any point we want to terminate Pathway, you're going to have to move. But that's what buying a lease means. Is that right?
Correct. Or you could just buy the lease and say, get out now. But we had no reason.
But you would still have to keep paying rent because you do have a lease with the fee owner.
You still have to paying rent.
Got it.
That's correct. And if you didn't pay the rent, then your lease was in default, and the fee owner could cancel your lease.
At that point, he was probably hoping you'd default on the lease so that or they wouldn't have hated it. Okay, I get it. How long did that deal take? Is that a couple years? Is that a couple months? I know you said that you dropped the 08 to 09, but just in the context of
that took 3 to 4 years.
Okay, none of these things happen overnight.
No, I'm telling you, development in New York City is a long game. And if you're unwilling to play the long game, then you can't play. It's also like any development, there's risk. In certain markets you have entitlement risk, in in New York City you have assemblage, holdout, tenant risk.
The Ring portfolio, fungus, and hazing for brokers.
All right, so let's talk about the Ring portfolio. So there was a guy who comes over from Europe in probably after World War II. Leo Ring. Leo Ring came to New York City with 2 cents to his name. Real New York City success story. Literally 2 cents to his name. I don't know how he got into real estate, but Leo Ring ultimately gets into real estate. And he buys a portfolio of 10 buildings. They're all office buildings, basically, except for one of them, in the Midtown South market, right? And he buys them, he leases them up. He buys one building, gets a mortgage on the building, takes the money from the mortgage, buys a second building, keeps doing this till he buys himself a nice portfolio. He has 2 sons, Frank and Michael. Okay. He passes away and the sons take over the portfolio. When he passed away, the portfolio was probably 95% leased. All right. By the time I show up on the scene, and I show up on the scene for the following reason, which I'll tell you in a minute, the buildings are probably 10% leased and bleeding money. There was very little in the way of mortgage on the property, but they're basically vacant buildings. Now, the reason the buildings were vacant was because they were extremely, extremely difficult to make a deal with. I mentioned to you when I met you that when I started out in the real estate business, I started out as a leasing broker, and the hazing ritual in a lot of the leasing brokerage firms was for people. They say, "Here's a lead. Call up this guy, Frank Ring, and see if you can, cut a deal for either the leasing or the sale of the building. And Frank is a charming person, loves to talk. He's very charming. He can talk to you for hours. And when you hang up the phone, it sounds like this is a guy that's interested in cutting a deal. And we're gonna, it's gonna be my first deal, and this is gonna be great. I'm gonna really cut a deal with this guy. Well, nobody ever cut a deal with Frank Rink. He never sold a building. Very difficult to even sign a lease with him. So you would do this, and he would talk to you and talk to you and talk to you until you got so frustrated you realized this was going nowhere, and you hung up and never called him again. So in any event, what had happened was Michael, they, as I told you, the buildings were significantly vacant and bleeding money. And they kept having to put money into the building, pay the real estate taxes, pay the operating expenses, etc. And Michael was getting very frustrated with the situation and decides he's going to sell his portion of the ownership. Now, I don't know, tell me if I need to explain this, but they own this in a TIC structure, which is TIC stands for tenancy in common. So it's as if each one owned 50% of the building. Okay? So Michael decides he's going to sell his 50% of 100% of his TIC, but 50% of the ownership in the buildings. He cuts a deal with a guy an extremely bright New York City real estate player, okay? And Michael had an allergy to paying taxes. So the guy structures the deal where he was going to lend Michael the money. You don't pay taxes on a loan, except that what Michael didn't realize, he was using Michael's own buildings as collateral for the loan. Now, Michael didn't need him to do that. Michael could have gone to the bank and borrowed the money on his own. So the guy basically went, this was the contract. It never closed, but the contract said he has a right to go to the bank, borrow X amount of dollars, and for that, Michael would sell, and he'd give Michael that money, and for that, Michael would sell him 50% of Michael's ownership. So they'd be partners. And all Michael got was money that he could have borrowed from the bank on his own. Okay? Yeah. Great deal, right?
Yeah.
So somebody picked up on this, and Michael switches attorneys. Michael switches attorneys, and the attorney takes a look at this and says, Michael, this guy is screwing you royally. You need to figure out a way out of this contract. Okay? So they go to court. They try to see if they can get out of the contract. It was sort of the contract. It wasn't a real contract. It was a term sheet, but turns out it was a binding term sheet. They couldn't get out. They couldn't get out of this, and they realized if they would continue, if this would happen, this would be a disaster for Michael. So I knew the lawyer. The lawyer calls me up, and he says, Dove, you need to help me here. You need to figure this out. So we end up going to the contract vendee, right? The one who had cut the deal with Michael. And we said, look, we want to buy you out of your contract. This guy put up $10 million, just to give you an idea of what took place. He put up $10 million, basically as a down payment to Michael, and we bought him out for $60 million. Okay? And we now controlled Michael's 50%. And besides, this was just what it took to buy him out. We then gave Michael money as well. So we now own 50%. Now, with a tick, I have a right to force a sale or a dissolution of the partnership, but I can do it with a tick. So I call up Frank Ring, who I knew from another deal that we had. Well, just to back up, Frank was in another deal where we also bought his partner's interest and ended up buying Frank out of one of his buildings. So we had done this once before. I call up Frank. I said, I want to come up to your office. And we had that first deal where we bought his partners out and ended up negotiating with Frank to get him out. And that happened like 6 months before. I call up Frank. I said, Frank, I want to come up to your office. I want to talk to you. Just sure, come up to the office. I come up to the office. I said, Frank, listen, hi, I'm your new partner. He says, what are you talking about? I said, I bought Michael's tick interest in the entire portfolio. I thought the guy's head was going to blow up. He says to me, you guys are like a freaking fungus. I said, all right, do you want to negotiate a deal? No, I'm not negotiating with you. You're going to have to force me out. I said, okay, see you in court. I walked out of the office, went to a local drugstore, bought fungal cream, to cure fungus, wrote him a note. I hope this helps. Put it in a Federal Express package and sent it over to him.
And then?
Anyway, we go to court. And Frank presents an idea. He says, listen, it's a tick. We can split the buildings. So each building will split in half. You'll own the left half. We'll own the right half. Perfect. And we can continue along everything as is. The judge, of course, it's like Solomon splitting the baby. We'll split the baby in half. The judge threw the whole thing out, and the judge set a date for the portfolio to be sold on the steps of the courthouse. And if that would have happened, had that happened, Frank would have had to pay the taxes on the sale because he wouldn't have been able to structure a 1031 sale, which I assume I don't have to explain. And I called Frank and I said, Frank, go do the arithmetic. You can negotiate we're going to buy this. We are going to outbid you. We're going to buy it. The difference is what's going to land in your pocket. You're going to end up with 100% of the money, or you're going to end up with 50% of the money. But that's the whole difference. You're not going to end up with the portfolio. And we ended up sitting down, being able to negotiate a deal where it never got to the auction at the courthouse. We negotiated a deal and we bought him out. I will tell you one funny piece that's in the contract. He wanted to know how much I bought his brother out for. I said, I can't tell you. I signed the confidentiality agreement. He said, okay, I can respect that. He says, but I want you to put in the contract that whatever you're paying me is more than you paid my brother. We had to put that in the contract, and it was in the contract.
Okay, real quick, I want to pick that apart for a second. So if you had to go to auction, why wouldn't he have been able to 1031? He would have gotten the money and he could have gotten his 60 days. You're just saying it would have forced him to do it so quickly he probably wouldn't have found something, but with y'all, you gave him the time?
No. What I'm saying is as follows. When you do a 1031 exchange, you can never have touched any portion of the money. If you touch the money, then that's it.
Okay, but even in an auction, why wouldn't the money just go to an exchange?
He would have needed our cooperation. in order to do that. And we would not have cooperated. That was our leverage.
In New York, is just going to court just part of the game? It's just like sport up there. It's like, hey, this is just part of the deal. We just do this.
You know something? I have to tell you, there are people who literally you have a computer, you have a lawyer, a litigator. I mean, you need a lawyer to transact, but there are people in this business who litigation is no different a tool than an Excel spreadsheet. In order to do business, you need an Excel spreadsheet to underwrite the deal. In order to do business, you need a litigator on retainer, and you're constantly litigating. But I won't tell you that that's everybody. It isn't everybody. There are plenty of people who just do business in the normal course of business in a regular way, negotiate deals, honor their commitments, and just do things in a normal fashion, and don't end up in litigation.
Until they do business with somebody that's a litigator.
Litigious.
What happened to the Ring portfolio once you got it? Did those turn into big high-rise developments? What was so great about those buildings to begin with?
What is fascinating about that deal is some of it was in a commercially zoned district, so you could never build residential there. That the commercially zoned district, the buildings in the commercially zoned district was actually net leased out on a 99-year lease and used by a landowner, a long-term landowner, as a 1031 exchange. So there was a very large parking lot on the west side that was sold by the owner, who had bought it decades earlier as a parking lot. But it was worth multiples more as a development site, and finally he decided to sell it for I think what still is the largest dollar per square foot number of any development site in New York. It was either $1,200 or $1,300 a square foot. It was huge. And he wanted an exchange. He didn't want to pay taxes. He wanted to do 1031 exchange. So he did a 99-year leasehold and used that as an exchange property. That was a part of it. The rest of it, except for one building, Gary flipped out one at a time to either converters or developers. Never ended up building or developing anything.
I just have to ask this. You ever done business with or against Trump going around New York City? Is he a good assembler? Like I read his book. One of the first business books I ever read was The Art of the Deal. You listened to how he assembled the Trump Plaza site. Did you ever run into him?
He was a minority partner with a group out of Hong Kong in it was called Television City. It was a bunch of land on the Upper West Side, and Extell bought from the majority partners, but he was a minority partner, so didn't deal with him directly. Bought that development site. He ended up suing his partners, claiming that they undersold it and lost. But that was my only, or when I was at Extell, the only interaction with Trump.
Okay, there's lots of ways to assemble a site. The one way that I probably have never heard of would be hiring Japanese actors to help get this done.
So different story, different. It wasn't a development, but a different story, but a funny one. So I bought a building with a partner, an office building in Philadelphia, and two of the floors. It was probably a 250,000, 300,000 square foot office building. The first and the second floor, the previous owner, the guy we bought it from, had divvied it up into like a clothing mart. Okay, so you had salesmen who represented different brands, and they had little booths, and they would use that as their base. And once a month, all of the various representatives from the various different department stores would come down to see, for them to show their wares and to to purchase for the coming seasons. The problem is, each one of them, there were two floors. There was a children's wear floor and an adult floor. Each one had an association. The problem is the landlord, when he negotiated the deal, negotiated with the association as if the association was going to pay one check for the entire floor, and therefore gave them a better deal because they were leasing a large amount of space. But that's not what he did. He then he negotiated with the association, agreed to a price per square foot, and then signed a lease with each individual salesperson. So each guy had a tiny little booth, and there was a lease for this tiny little booth. So any vacancy was the landlord's problem. So he basically negotiated a wholesale deal and then signed retail leases, which in my world makes absolutely no sense. When we bought the building, we knew the opportunity was to vacate these two floors because they were hugely under market, especially when you factor in the vacancy. Now they had like a 10-year lease. Now, how was I getting them out? So what we found in doing the due diligence was that the lender on the building, their lease did not have an SNDA in it as it related to a lender. So normally the lease is superior to the mortgage. And if the bank forecloses, they have to leave the lease in place. Except these leases did not have that clause in it. So if a bank foreclosed on the building, they could legally throw out all the tenants. And once I realized that, I realized that was my leverage. So we close on the building. We get a loan from the Bank of Tokyo. I wait 6 months. I knew I had to do this. I wait 6 months. I go to the head of each of the associations, and I tell them we have a problem. What's the problem? We made a mistake when we bought the building, when we didn't realize that we can't afford the loan. We over-leveraged. And so they said, okay, so why is that my problem? I said, it's your problem because if you look at your leases, you'll note that you don't have an SNDA, and therefore, if the bank forecloses and takes the building back, they can throw you out, and you will have no lease. Well, they said, you're full of it, and threw me out of their office. And I said, listen, I'm telling you, have a lawyer look at your leases. They didn't. Who buys a building and 6 months later, right, is going to give the building back to the bank? It didn't make any sense. So I said I had to make the point. I had to drive the point home. I went and I hired 2 Japanese actors, an older guy and a younger guy. All right. And now, by the way, to this day, I don't know if either of these 2 guys speak a word of Japanese. They look Japanese. I don't even know if they were Japanese. But anyway, I meet them and I said, okay, this is the deal. As I told you, once a month, everybody was there because all of the department store buyers were there and everybody was there to sell to the department store buyers. I said, on the day of this, when everybody is there, I want you to come down to the building. You don't speak a word of English because I don't want anybody talking to you. Okay? You just have to make your presence known. He says, well, how do we do that? I said, very simple. I said, young guy, here's a pad. You walk around in a pad and just scratch notes. Make it look like Japanese. I don't care. You just scratching notes on the pad. I said, old guy, you're just screaming and yelling, pointing and making a lot of noise. That's your job. You walk into every booth, you're just screaming what sounds like Japanese, and you walk out. That's what you do. That's the job. All right? And that's what they did. They showed up on that day. They spent a couple of hours running around, screaming and yelling in something that approximated Japanese or sounded like to someone who doesn't know Japanese like Japanese. The next day I get a phone call. They say, what the hell's going on? I said, what do you want? I gave you warning. It's the Bank of Tokyo. They sent representatives from Tokyo. They're taking the building back, and they want to see what they're taking back. So he says to me, well, what are we going to do? I said, well, you have two choices. I can help you. I'd be happy to help you. We will find you new space, negotiate a lease, and you move. I'll negotiate with the Bank of Tokyo to help them defray some of the costs. So it's a win-win. Or you do nothing and they'll throw you out. No, please help us. I said, okay. I find them a space. I negotiate a deal. Okay. It needs to be ratified by the entire membership of these two groups. And they call me up and they say, listen, nobody knows the deal better than you. Can you come down to a meeting on Monday night in Philadelphia in the space where we're going to have a vote ratifying the signing of these new leases, this new lease? I said, sure. I call up my partner and I said, you got to come with me because I'm worried these guys are going to kill me. I mean, yeah, right? So we go down. I present the lease. These are the terms of the lease. This is why you have to do the lease. This is the whole story, soup to nuts. All right? They ratify the lease. They vote. They approve the lease. The head of the association gets up and says, we could never have done this without Dove Hertz. We owe him a round of applause. They stand up and I get a round of applause in appreciation for helping them move out.
So if I ever see you come up to me with two Japanese guys, I need to do a little bit further due diligence, right?
Speak to them in English because I assure you they don't speak Japanese.
So funny. All right. What are you doing today? Why did you leave Extell?
So that's a great story. All right. So I'm a little nuts. I was in 2016, I was 59 years old. And I could have stayed at Extell for the rest of my life, very happily, doing the same thing. And the truth is, I just had enough. I was bored. I always wanted to open up my own shop. And I realized that the opportunity to do that was closing. I mean, I was 59 years old. When was I going to start? At 75? So I realized it's now or never. And I went to Gary Barnett, the owner of Extell, and I said, listen, Gary, I want to leave. I want to start my own shop. He said, what are you, crazy? You're 59 years old. Nobody does that at 59 years old. What do you really want? I said, I really want nothing. I want to open up my own shop. He says, no. You want something. I said, no, I don't want anything. I just really want to open up my own shop. It took him a couple of months to really wrap his head around. And I said, I don't want to leave you high and dry. So I'd like to work out an orderly transition so that, I've been here almost 14 years. I don't want to hurt you in doing this. I just want to open up my own shop. It took him a couple of months to wrap his head around it. He finally did. And we worked out a transition plan. And in November of 2016, I turned 60 in December. November of 2016, I hung out my own shingle and opened up DH Property Holdings. To be honest, when I opened up shop, I started with I brought in a guy as a number two, Aaron Malitsky, and we sat down. We said, okay, okay, now we opened up the business. What are we going to do?
You didn't have a business plan yet?
No, I had no business plan. Just knew, hey, I know New York. I know real estate. I'll figure it out. Didn't have a plan. We did one deal. I actually bought Gary Barnett's father-in-law's portfolio and we bought, 10 buildings, flipped 6 or 7 of them, and 3 of them, we had a partner who kept them and, put some gas in the tank. That's the first deal we did, but that wasn't a business plan. That just sort of happened. God sent me a present. And took a little time, and we looked around the different property types. I never liked hotel. I didn't want to get involved in rent regulated apartments in New York. Retail was on the way down. Office didn't speak to me. I started running out of choices, but e-commerce was just starting at that point, really taking off, I should say. And, we realized that logistics distribution was going to be something that needed to come to New York City. Until then, New Jersey was basically the warehouse for New York, and it was only business to business that used those warehouses. There was no consumers involved. Until e-commerce, it wasn't warehouse to consumer. It was warehouse to business. But we realized that it's easier to be a developer who understands New York City, because New York City is its own beast, than it is to be an industrial guy and learn New York City development. So I decided we're going to focus on industrial development. And there hadn't been a new spec industrial building developed in New York City in 50 years. So we decided, all right, got to go out and learn industrial. And for 6 months, didn't do a deal. Just spoke to anyone who would talk to us who was in the industrial space. Walked over 2 million square feet of industrial land. And we decided, all right, we know enough. Let's go find a deal. So we found a deal, 640 Columbia, which ended up to be the first multi-story logistics distribution center built on the East Coast. Prologis had built one on the West Coast, and this was the first that ended up being built on the East Coast. We built it, leased it to Amazon, and sold it. Okay, that's the short of the story. But that has an interesting story to it. I don't know. It seems to follow me. All right. Goldman Sachs was our partner, and hadn't gone to contract yet. And I get a phone call from the business guy at Goldman Sachs. He says, listen, this is on a Thursday morning. He says, I am going to investment committee for approval tomorrow. In talking to the investment committee, they realize only one other person has built a building like this. And no one has built it on the East Coast. And certainly nobody has built it in New York. And they're concerned about the hard cost numbers that we're underwriting. They want it proven out. We need you to get a GMP signed before Friday morning. That is a guaranteed maximum price for those in the development business. Means the GC guarantees that he can deliver it for these hard cost numbers. It's Thursday. I need it by Friday morning. Okay? I call up the GC who we've been working with, and I said, listen, and we have no plans. We have a floor plan. I don't have anything. I don't have a structural plan. I don't have an engineering plan. I have nothing. I have floor plans. I said, I need you to sign a GMP before 9:00 tomorrow morning. Otherwise, this deal's not happening. He says, you're out of your mind. I said, yeah, but you're going to do this. We're going to figure this out. He says, how do I do this without plans? I said, you have a floor plan. You've built 100 buildings. Well, I don't know how many. You built a lot of buildings. Go figure it out. So we basically spend the day and the night, up the whole night, negotiating a GMP. All right? We negotiate a GMP, deliver it to Goldman Sachs, investment committee approves this. Okay? Fast forward, it takes us a year. We get all of the permits. Excuse me. We hire all of the subs. The GC hires all of the subs. Everything's ready to go. We go out and we get a construction loan. Right? Now, this is my first deal. A developer, when you build a building, needs to sign with the bank a completion guarantee. Bank doesn't want a building that's half built and they take it back. So you need to sign a completion guarantee. I didn't have a large enough balance sheet to sign a completion guarantee, so I bring in a credit enhancer, right? A guy that I had met. Actually, his father was a very wealthy man, owned a lot of residential real estate, and the father at this point is in his late 80s. And I said, I'll make a deal with you. You sign the completion guarantee. You with me sign the completion guarantee, and I'll give you a piece of the deal. No problem. So we negotiate. We present his financials to the bank. The bank approves the financials. We negotiate the whole works. It is 10 minutes to 5. Right? The deal's all done. The title company is about to press send on the wire, right? And the deal's closed. I get a phone call from the son. My father just died. Now, what that means legally, other than the fact that I feel sorry for the guy that his father died, what that means legally is everything that he signed is worthless. Everything that the father signed is worthless because it now moves from him personally into his estate. The legal opinions that the lawyers had to sign in order for this to close, they were all invalid. And literally, I had just gotten a phone call from the title company, an email. Should I hit send? Is everybody approved? Are we approved? And then I get the phone call, the guy's dead. And I'm sitting there. It's my first deal. First deal. What do I do? What do I do? Do I ignore the fact which came first and tell him, go ahead, wire? Or do I stop it and call Goldman and say, listen, the guy's dead. We can't do this. And I'm sitting there debating. What do I do? And I said, I am starting. This is the first deal. How do I want to build my business? Do I want to build my business on a foundation of complete and total honesty or not? And I said, I'm not doing it. I called up Goldman. I said, the guy died. Can't wire the money.
I thought you were about to tell me you went and did like CPR, brought him back to life for a couple minutes, hit send, and then.
No, now wait. The story gets better. Fast forward, okay? The company that gave us the GMP ends up going bankrupt. Nothing to do with us. We hadn't even started construction. Ends up going bankrupt because of a deal that had nothing to do with us. Actually, Goldman Sachs was the lender on the deal, but it had nothing to do with Goldman Sachs. Had I let that deal happen and we gotten the construction loan and they would have started construction, I would have been stuck mid-construction with a lender, with a general contractor who was bankrupt, and my completion guarantee would have been called. So at the end of the day, honesty is the best policy.
Did you know you were building for Amazon when you started, or was it a spec project?
No, it was a spec project. We were lucky that Amazon showed up before we'd gone vertical. We were putting in the foundations because they wanted certain changes made that we were able to do.
How did you source capital from Goldman Sachs? Did you just put the deal together, hire a capital markets broker, and they brought in Goldman, or did you already have a relationship? That's a big partner for a first deal.
Yeah, no, we hired an equity broker uh, to go find Goldman. Goldman had just lost another industrial development deal, so they were one of the few institutional equity groups that had the vision to see that where e-commerce was going, and that logistics distribution was going to be a need that was underserved at that time. And because they had just climbed in on another deal that they had literally just lost. So when this was presented to them, they jumped all over it. And they moved very quickly, I have to say.
And are you doing more of those, or was that just a one and done? Like, are you trying to do more vertical industrial, or how you started with no plan, then you just do this amazing industrial deal. What became the plan after that? Just being opportunistic, or what?
We stayed in the industrial sector. Did about 2 million square feet. We bought about 2 million buildable square feet between 2017 and 2019, and then started branching out into other urban infill markets. So we're today in Boston, in Philly, and in total have developed or are in the pipeline about 6 million square feet.
Okay, so I'm kind of shocked, and maybe you'll get there. Why are you not about to go build the next Central Park Tower? Like, are you going to go assemble yourself an iconic site, or are you just going to let other people play that game?
I'm going to let other people play that game. First of all, as I said, it's the long game. To develop another iconic building, it's a 10-year game if you're really going to do it right and not buy it from somebody else. High rise, look, everything has its risks. High rise construction has a particular set of risks that I don't see a need to take. And also the condo market in New York has softened. So it's just, look, in my mind right now, the top of the real estate food group is in the industrial sector.
What does 2024 look like for y'all? Is it you guys seeing lots of deals, or how are you thinking about the market now? Like, what's interesting?
So in July of 2021, we started assembling. When we started, we were only doing development. In July of 2021, we started another platform buying existing industrial buildings in the same markets. So today, since then we've assembled 1.5 million square feet of existing Class B industrial buildings, all value add. I know you like that sector.
Talking dirty to me, Dove.
In New Jersey, Boston, Philly. We opened up an LA office about a year ago. We haven't done anything there yet, but we're looking forward to doing our first deal there. And we're that Class B market today is very strong. We're very excited about that market. They're not building more Class B buildings. Tenant renewal in those markets are extremely strong because the tenants have nowhere to go. So we're very excited about that and hope to keep growing that.
Okay. I remember we talked about this at IMN. I buy in red states and you buy in blue states. I was like, you pick the hardest markets in the country to own property. Boston, LA. Why do you choose these markets that have all this extra stuff going on in them?
Because I can.
What does that mean?
It's so the philosophy is like this. We buy in urban infill markets because they are the hardest markets to get into. But when you get into them and you have product in those markets, your competition is much less than in the type of markets that you buy in developing. And, I've honed a skill set in New York that I've been able to transfer to other urban infill markets. So that is the answer to the I can.
And do y'all raise deal by deal, or are you a fund?
We do not have a fund. It's deal by deal. We have a loose understanding with an institutional equity partner in this platform to do but it's deal by deal. Nothing's crossed. It's all deal by
You
deal.
like it that way?
Each one has its pluses and minuses, right? Having a fund has a plus because you have the money on hand, but it's got its minuses. Doing deal by deal has a minus. You got to raise money for each deal, but it's got pluses too. You have more control. You're typically able to negotiate better deals for yourself. Promotes. Nothing's crossed, so every deal stands alone. If you have a stinker, it doesn't bring down the whole house.
If I were to come to you and say, "Hey, I'm a Texan. I'm coming to New York, and I want to put together a site," would you first tell me don't even try? The game is so dominant. Like, is there even a site for a Texan to put together, or would I just be the fish out of water showing up and the joke's on me?
Real estate is local. You know that. So if I came to Texas and I said, Chris, I'm going to compete against you, right? You'd laugh. So you can't compete against me. I know everybody here. I know the sites. I know the people. I know how the game is played. It's the same thing in New York. It's not different. You want to come to New York? If you want to come to New York, you better hire somebody local who knows what he's doing to do it for you.
I'm partnering with you. I'm not hiring we're going to JV. I'm not even attempting to go out into that world without you, Dove. All right. You've built an awesome career, and the thread of your career is negotiating. You've negotiated with Japanese actors. You've negotiated with parking garage owners. You've negotiated with a hoarder. You've negotiated with Vornado. Up and down the board, you've made deals happen. The Ring brothers. I guess my question is, what do you know about negotiating that you've learned over all these times? Is it that there's always a price for everything, or is there something that you've been able to masterfully kind of understand about negotiating that's gotten all these deals done?
All right. So, of course, I'll tell you a story, right? I was negotiating to buy a building as part of an assemblage. Last building on the site that I needed. And there's a book actually written about New York holdouts, where they show you where buildings that have been built in weird shapes, like where they built around the building because they couldn't get that one building. And this guy was giving me a hard time. He wasn't going to sell. And I bought him the book. And I said, here's your choice. You want money or you want to be in the book? Those are the choices. Okay? So he's flipping through the book and he sees, oh, I know the story behind this one site. I know why there was a tenant, a holdout there. I know why it was a woman who didn't move. I said, great, tell me the story. I'd love to hear it. He said, and they offered her, the developer offered her, she's living in a 4-story walk-up on the top floor, okay, in a studio apartment. Nothing to write home about. They offered her a condo on the east side, doorman building, 3-bedroom. It would have been the lap of luxury. Any normal person would have taken it. He said, I'll tell you why she didn't take it. I said, go ahead, why? He said, she was an alcoholic. He knew the woman. He said she was an alcoholic and she'd go out every night to a bar and come home dead drunk. And she was embarrassed to move to a doorman building because she didn't want the doorman to see her coming in every night drunk. And that's the reason she did not move. And to me, that is the lesson in negotiating. You've got to get to know the person you're negotiating with, because it's not always money that pushes the button. Had they moved her into another 4-story walk-up with a bar on the first floor, she would have gone in a heartbeat. But they weren't talking to her. They were talking over her. And that's you want to know that, in my mind, the critical component to a good negotiator is listening. Understand what is going to move the needle for the person on the other side of the table. A lot of times it is money, but it isn't always money. Or it's the structure of the deal. There are different components. You have different levers in the negotiation. Understand what moves the needle for them. To me, that's the key, the critical key to negotiating. Get to know the person. It's as much as real estate is about the numbers, it's as much about the people. You have to get to know the people.
Dove, this was awesome. I'm a huge fan, and I really appreciate you sharing your stories today.
Thank you. Thank you for the honor of appearing on your podcast.
Jason, as we sat back years ago and were envisioning where Fort was going to go, we realized we needed to bring in a global workforce, a remote workforce that could work with us. And a few of the reasons why were obviously cost, which I think is the first thing that comes to everybody's mind. But then when we talk about shifts, a 24-hour shift, and maybe you can go a little further there, and some of the other benefits that we've realized as we've gone on. And now we sit here today in 2022. At the time we first had this was maybe 10 employees. Now we're at 46. Mm-hmm. And as you think about the next chapter and how we're scaling, it's almost inconceivable that we would do it without Relay Human Cloud. So can you just talk a little bit more to how the shifts work at Fort and the productivity and some of the other benefits that we've learned about working with a global workforce?
It's actually been pretty transformational from how we think about how we're going to not only get stuff done today, but how we're going to get stuff done in the future as we grow. And so when you start going down that path of thinking about you're going to start working with people on the other side of the world, right? There's a lot of questions that come up. How are we going to do it? How are we going to train them? How are we going to manage them? Who's managing them? All those things come up. What we found with Relay Human Cloud was that all those thoughts had already been taken care of, and that we could focus on what type of talent is there that can join our team. Does it fit our need? And once we saw that all that thought and energy had already been put into the operational part of managing and running a team, and the thing that we focus on here locally, then it was just a matter of finding the talent. And what I think that Relay Human Cloud has done really well is find a lot of great talent. And, these are people that are highly educated, that can provide a ton of value to a company like ours that otherwise we can't find here. And obviously it's at a high or a extreme cost savings compared to what we could find here. So what we started looking for was how could we supplement what we currently do with the team overseas. And it started off for us from an accounting perspective. We have a lot of these things that are repetitive, task-driven, that just never end. And we knew that our team was taking on a lot of work during the day, which was limiting our ability to take on new properties. And so we have a choice. We can hire another accountant or another staff accountant, or promote somebody and bring that person on. But we're really just trying to solve, at first, a repetitive task. So when we reached out to Relay Human Cloud, we discovered that not only could we solve that problem, we could get a very qualified person that could not only do that, help support on a lot of other things. And so very quickly it turned into, we're trying to solve some repetitive tasks to bringing on more and more team members that were actually helping us grow our accounting department without having to bring on a lot of people here. And so that just continued to grow. So since then, we've brought on additional assistants, but it started with accounting. The benefit of having a team working globally is that you get the benefit of around the clock, and it never ends. And so because we have a team here working on things, obviously the time runs out during the day, but there's things that they're gonna come into work tomorrow and they're gonna have to start doing that again. One of those things is, and a good example is cash reconciliations of every bank account. At Fort Capital, we have 50 bank accounts and there's cash reconciliations that have to happen every day. Well, that was something that locally a team had to come into work and start working on every day. Well, that just means there's other things they can't start working on. What happened immediately with our team at Relay Human Cloud was that overnight they were processing all those. They were doing all that accounting work on the back end so that when our team showed up in the morning, they could start on more important tasks that were happening locally directly related to the property. And that allowed us to create efficiencies. And so that's just one benefit. We can go through an entire list of things that we have discovered that overnight can be done to help increase the efficiency of the accounting team. That extends beyond the accounting team. It also extends to the property management team, processing invoices. So Fort Capital, we have millions of square feet of industrial space across the country. And with that, you have a lot of invoicing that's happening at all times. You could name a million things, whether it's paying bills, contractors, tenants, whatever it is. There's a million invoices and that can all be processed in India overnight so that when our team comes in, they're not spending their day processing invoices, which allows us to get to more proactive accounting measures so that we're using our accounting team to actually push the company forward, not keep up with what's coming at us, right? And so we found a ton of efficiencies by having the 24-hour workday.
So following that up, it was also important to us because that could have been done anywhere, but we wanted it happening under one roof with people that we knew, that we worked with daily, that were part of our team. And so as you think about these people that are halfway across the globe, it still doesn't seem like it seems like they're in the next room over.
Right. And that's a good point. And I think what's important to understand there is that this group of individuals that are working in India are working directly for our team. They are a part of our team. They're in our systems. They communicate with our team every day. They are not just an extension of our team. They are a part of our team. And so it is much, much different than if you go hire a third-party service out there in the world that you're asking to process invoices, who you're having to send critical or important data to that is, or might be sensitive, right? Information. We actually have all that internal, and this team is a part of that internal team. And so it's a much different way to look at outsourcing than if you're just outsourcing it, even here locally in America. There's a risk there that you're sending your data to somewhere else. This is all happening internally.